From a bartender's fever dream to a cult phenomenon, the Boondock Saints had one of the strangest journeys in film history, including a disastrous $300,000 deal with Harvey Weinstein, a director who insulted every A-list actor in Hollywood, a band album that sold only 690 copies, and a theatrical release in just 5 theaters that earned a pathetic $30,471. Behind the Vigilante brothers and Willem Dafoe's unforgettable performance lies a treasure trove of bizarre production secrets, accidental Toronto landmarks caught on camera, and career-destroying ego that was so spectacular it spawned its own damning documentary. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Boondock Saints. Fact 1. Bartender turned overnight sensation, then blacklisted. Troy Duffy's rise to Hollywood stardom reads like a fairy tale. Except this one has a spectacularly disastrous ending that was almost entirely his own fault. In the mid-1990s, Duffy was working as a bartender and bouncer at a Los Angeles bar called J. Sloan's, writing his screenplay during breaks and downtime between shifts. He had never written a script before in his life, but after seeing a dead woman being wheeled out of a drug dealer's apartment in his building, he was inspired to create a story about 2 brothers who take justice into their own hands. He completed the Boondock Saints screenplay in the fall of 1996 and managed to get it into the hands of a producer's assistant at New Line Cinema. And from there, the script began making its way through Hollywood. What happened next seemed like every aspiring filmmaker's wildest dream come true. In March of 1997, multiple studios entered a bidding war for Duffy's script, and Miramax Films, led by the powerful Harvey Weinstein, won with an offer of $300,000 for the screenplay. But Weinstein didn't stop there. He gave Duffy a $15 million budget to make the film, allowed him to direct it despite having 0 filmmaking experience, agreed to let Duffy's band, The Brood, record the soundtrack, and even offered to buy J. Sloan's bar and run it together with Duffy as co-owners. For a bartender with no Hollywood connections, this was an unprecedented deal that catapulted him into the spotlight, with talk shows and newspapers covering his rags-to-riches story. The problem was that success went straight to Duffy's head in the worst possible way. He began bad-mouthing Harvey Weinstein around town, making impossible demands, and treating everyone involved in the project with contempt and arrogance. By December of 1997, Weinstein had pulled Miramax out of the project entirely, and Duffy found himself informally blacklisted throughout Hollywood. The Golden Boy had crashed and burned in less than a year, losing not just the film deal, but also his band's record contract and any goodwill he might have built in the industry. Fact 2. The band album that sold 690 copies. While Troy Duffy's script for the Boondock Saints was generating massive buzz in Hollywood, he also had dreams of becoming a rock star with his band, which was originally called The Brood. When Harvey Weinstein and Miramax initially purchased the script, part of the deal included having Duffy's band record the soundtrack for the film, and they even attracted interest from major record labels, including Madonna's Maverick Records. This seemed like the perfect opportunity for Duffy to achieve success in both filmmaking and music at the same time, but his ego and refusal to listen to experienced professionals would doom his musical ambitions just as spectacularly as it damaged his film career. After Miramax dropped the Boondock Saints and canceled the Brood's record contract, the band managed to sign with Atlantic Records in 1999, which should have been a major breakthrough for any aspiring musician. The legendary guitarist Jeff "Skunk" Baxter, known for his work with Steely Dan and the Doobie Brothers, who expressed genuine interest in producing the band and even singled out Duffy's brother Taylor as the lead vocalist for particular praise. Producer Ron St. Germain also came on board to help shape their sound. However, during the recording sessions, Duffy made the catastrophic decision to ignore all of their professional advice and attempted to wrest creative control away from these industry veterans who were trying to help him succeed. Both Baxter and St. Germain became increasingly concerned about the band's heavy alcohol consumption during recording. But Duffy refused to listen to their warnings or make any changes to the band's behavior. After renaming themselves the Boondock Saints to capitalize on the film's growing cult following, they released their debut album titled Release the Hounds in 2000. The result was one of the most spectacular commercial failures in music history, with the album selling exactly 690 copies in total before Atlantic Records promptly dropped them from the label. Shortly after this devastating failure, the band disbanded completely, ending Duffy's dreams of rock stardom alongside his crumbling film career. Fact 3. 5 theaters, 1 week, $30,471. The Boondock Saints has one of the most spectacularly disastrous theatrical releases in film history, playing in only 5 theaters across the entire United States for just 1 week in January of 2000. During that single week of screenings, the film earned a grand total of $30,471 at the box office before being pulled from theaters completely. To put that number in perspective, most wide-release films play in thousands of theaters and earn millions of dollars on their opening weekend alone. But the Boondock Saints couldn't even crack 6 figures despite having recognizable stars like Willem Dafoe and a budget of $6 million to recoup. The reasons behind this catastrophic release were complicated and partly tied to timing that couldn't have been worse. After Troy Duffy's falling out with Harvey Weinstein and Miramax, the film was eventually picked up by a small independent company called Franchise Pictures with less than half the original budget. When the movie was finally completed and ready for distribution, it was shopped around at the 1999 Cannes Film Festival, but every major American distribution company passed on it. And the film's ultra-violent content and vigilante justice themes were simply too risky for distributors in the wake of the Columbine High School shooting, which had occurred just weeks before test screenings began. Eventually, a tiny distributor called Indican Pictures agreed to give the film a limited release, but theater owners were extremely hesitant to show such a violent movie so soon after Columbine. The result was a release so limited that it barely qualified as a theatrical run at all. The film appeared in only 5 cities for 7 days before disappearing entirely. Industry insiders considered it essentially dead on arrival, and Troy Duffy's dream of creating the next Pulp Fiction seemed completely shattered. The film's poor reception wasn't helped by the fact that critics who did see it were largely unimpressed, and with many calling it a juvenile imitation of Quentin Tarantino's style without any of the substance. Fact 4. Columbine killed the theatrical release. The Boondock Saints was supposed to be Troy Duffy's big break, but the timing couldn't have been worse. The film was all set for a proper theatrical release when tragedy struck on April 20, 1999, just weeks before the movie's test screenings were scheduled. The Columbine High School shooting in Colorado shocked the entire nation, and suddenly, Hollywood found itself in the middle of an intense debate about violence in media and whether movies, video games, and other entertainment were contributing to real-world violence. Theater owners and distributors became extremely nervous about releasing anything that glorified guns or depicted extreme violence. And the Boondock Saints, with its 246 uses of the F-word and constant scenes of vigilante shootouts, was exactly the kind of film that made everyone uncomfortable in the aftermath of the massacre. According to Duffy himself in his DVD commentary, the Columbine tragedy directly led to the film getting shelved in the United States. Major distributors who had previously shown interest suddenly backed away from the project, not wanting to be associated with a movie that some might see as celebrating gun violence. The film that was supposed to launch on hundreds of screens across America ended up getting dumped into just 5 theaters in January 2000 for a single week. Industry insiders at the time suggested that even though the film had nothing to do with school shootings or teen violence, the post-Columbine climate made it nearly impossible for theaters to justify showing a film where the heroes mow down dozens of people with handguns while reciting prayers. The result was catastrophic for Duffy's career. His movie earned just $30,471 during its entire theatrical run. essentially making it invisible to mainstream audiences. What should have been a triumphant debut for a first-time filmmaker instead became a cautionary tale about how external events completely beyond a director's control can derail even the most promising projects. Fact 5. The CN Tower blooper in Boston. The Boondock Saints is supposed to take place entirely in Boston, Massachusetts, but eagle-eyed viewers have spotted one glaring mistake that reveals where the movie was actually filmed. During the scene where Connor McManus stands on a rooftop preparing to drop a toilet down onto a Russian mobster's head, there's a brief moment where he looks out across the skyline, and right there in the top right corner of the screen, you can clearly see Toronto's iconic CN Tower rising up in the background. This is a pretty significant blooper considering the CN Tower is one of the most recognizable landmarks in Canada and looks absolutely nothing like anything you'd find in Boston. The reason for this mistake comes down to budget and logistics. While Troy Duffy originally wanted to film the entire movie in Boston, his hometown, and the setting for the story, the production simply couldn't afford it. After losing the original $15 million budget from Miramax and having to settle for less than half that amount from Franchise Pictures, the filmmakers had to make compromises. Boston isn't exactly known for being filmmaker-friendly when it comes to tax credits and production costs, so the crew ended up shooting most of the film in Toronto, which offers much better financial incentives for movie productions. Toronto has long been used as a stand-in for American cities in countless films and television shows. But there's an ongoing joke in the industry that it only works as long as the CN Tower doesn't sneak into the shot. The tower stands 553 meters tall and dominates the Toronto skyline, making it nearly impossible to avoid if you're filming anywhere near the downtown core. In this particular scene, the production team clearly wasn't careful enough about framing the shot, and the tower made it all the way through filming, editing, and the final cut without anyone catching it or deciding it was worth the expense to digitally remove it. The mistake has since become a favorite piece of trivia among fans who love pointing out the moment when Boston suddenly sprouts a massive Canadian landmark. Fact 6. Catholic churches refuse to participate. When Troy Duffy set out to make the Boondock Saints, he envisioned a deeply Catholic film centered around two Irish brothers on a religious mission to cleanse Boston of evil. So naturally, he needed an authentic Catholic church for several key scenes. The opening sequence shows Connor and Murphy McManus attending Mass and listening to a priest's sermon about the murder of Kitty Genovese, which becomes the spiritual catalyst for their entire vigilante crusade. Given that Catholicism isn't just background decoration in this movie, but the very foundation of the brothers' motivation, filming in a genuine Catholic church seemed essential to the story's authenticity. However, word spread quickly through Boston's Catholic community about what Duffy's script actually contained, and church leaders were not pleased with what they read. The film depicts extreme violence, profanity-laced dialogue with the F word appearing 246 times, and vigilante justice carried out in God's name, all of which directly conflicted with Catholic teachings about the sanctity of life and forgiveness. When Duffy approached Catholic churches in the Boston area requesting permission to film, he was met with consistent refusals from every single one. The churches objected to being associated with a film that glorified killing, even if the targets were criminals, and they didn't want their sacred spaces used as backdrops for what they viewed as a morally problematic narrative. Left without any Catholic options, the production team had to find an alternative, and they settled on the Church of the Covenant, a beautiful historic church located on Newbury Street in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood. The only problem was that this church is Lutheran, not Catholic, which creates a theological inconsistency that eagle-eyed viewers familiar with liturgical differences might notice. The irony here is almost perfect. A film so steeped in Catholic imagery, ritual, and theology had to fake its most important religious setting because actual Catholic institutions wanted nothing to do with it. the Church of the Covenant's Gothic architecture and traditional interior design worked well enough on camera that most viewers never noticed the switch. But for a movie built on the foundation of Irish Catholic identity, having to use a Protestant church was an awkward compromise born entirely from the script's controversial content. Fact 7. Rocco was Rocco playing Rocco. One of the most unusual casting decisions in the Boondock Saints was having David Dellarocco play a character also named David Dellarocco, a role that was written specifically for him by director Troy Duffy. The two men had been friends since childhood, and Duffy knew Dellarocco's personality so well that he built the entire character around his real-life mannerisms, quirks, and speech patterns. In the film, the character goes by the nickname Rocco, or the Funny Man, and he serves as the comedic relief sidekick to the McManus brothers as they embark on their vigilante mission to rid Boston of criminals. What makes this casting even more interesting is that David Dellarocco wasn't a professional actor when Duffy wrote the role for him. He had moved to Hollywood years earlier, trying to make it in the entertainment industry, but hadn't found success. Duffy loved his friend's natural personality and sense of humor so much that he convinced him to come back and be part of the film. Dellarocco brought an authenticity to the character that would have been nearly impossible for a trained actor to replicate, since he was essentially playing an exaggerated version of himself. His loud, profanity-laced outbursts and nervous energy weren't acting choices so much as they were genuine expressions of who he was as a person. The character became so identified with the actor that fans often referred to him simply as Rocco, rather than by his full character name, and David Dellarocco has embraced this connection throughout his career. He reprised the role in the 2009 sequel, The Boondock Saints 2. All Saints' Day, appearing in a dream sequence where his character guides the McManus brothers on their mission. The meta-casting decision of having someone play themselves under their own name added an extra layer of authenticity to a film that was already trying to capture a gritty, realistic feel, despite its over-the-top violence and stylized action sequences. Fact 8. Duffy insulted every major actor. Before the Boondock Saints even began filming, writer and director Troy Duffy managed to alienate some of the biggest names in Hollywood without ever actually meeting them. And the worst part is that almost all of it was captured on camera for the documentary Overnight. When Duffy was riding high on his initial deal with Miramax and had studios competing for his script, he began exhibiting the kind of ego that would eventually destroy his career. And one of the most shocking examples was how he talked about established actors who were being considered for roles in his film. According to reports and footage from Overnight, Duffy flatly refused to even consider Brad Pitt for any role in the Boondock Saints, despite Pitt being one of the hottest actors in Hollywood at the time, and someone who could have brought serious star power to an independent production. But Duffy's dismissiveness didn't stop there. The documentary captured him on a phone call with his casting agent where he called Keanu Reeves a punk and dismissed Ethan Hawke as a talentless fool, showing an astonishing level of arrogance for a first-time filmmaker who had never even stepped foot on a movie set before. What makes this even more bizarre is that all three of these actors had proven themselves in action movies and could have been perfect for the kind of stylized crime thriller Duffy was trying to make. Reeves had already starred in Speed and The Matrix, Hawke had demonstrated his range in films like Gattaca, and Pitt was coming off critical and commercial successes. Instead of recognizing what experienced actors could bring to his debut film, Duffy based his rejections entirely on his personal opinions of their previous work and perceived personalities, never giving them a chance to even audition or discuss the project. This pattern of insulting and alienating people in the industry became one of the defining characteristics of Duffy's brief time in the Hollywood spotlight, and it contributed significantly to his rapid fall from grace after Miramax dropped the project. Fact 9. Guy Ritchie allegedly ripped off a scene Billy Connolly was at a red carpet event for Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events when he made a surprising discovery that would lead to an interesting phone call with director Troy Duffy. The legendary Scottish comedian had just seen Guy Ritchie's film Snatch, and something about it didn't sit right with him. According to Duffy's recounting of the story during an interview for the film's 25th anniversary, Connolly called him up and immediately said, "Dear boy, they effed us." When a confused Duffy asked who had done what, Connolly's response was direct. "They ripped us off. Snatch. Guy Ritchie." Duffy describes rushing to rent the film to see what Connolly was talking about, watching it carefully for any similarities to the Boondock Saints. For the first 15 minutes, he didn't notice anything unusual, but then came the scene that caught Connolly's attention. In Snatch, Benicio del Toro's character, Frankie Four Fingers, enters a diamond exchange disguised as a rabbi, and when he opens his coat, it reveals an arsenal of weapons strapped to his body. This bore a striking resemblance to the scene in the Boondock Saints where Connolly's character, Il Duce, sweeps open his coat to reveal multiple guns attached to his chest before confronting the McManus twins. Duffy's reaction upon seeing it was immediate. "Oh, mother fear." However, Duffy himself admitted in the same interview that filmmakers constantly borrow ideas from each other, saying, "We rip each other off all the time. I have no conscience about it. I am a thief here and there, but at least I put my own spin on it." He acknowledged that while Guy Ritchie would never give him credit for the idea, the practice of borrowing visual concepts is common in filmmaking. The coat full of guns trope had actually appeared in other films around the same time, including The Matrix, where Keanu Reeves's character Neo enters a lobby with weapons strapped to his body, making it unclear whether Ritchie was specifically referencing the Boondock Saints or simply using a popular action movie visual that was circulating in late 1990s cinema. Fact 10. The damning documentary by former friends. Most directors hire professionals to document their rise to fame, but Troy Duffy made the fatal mistake of asking two of his own band members to film his journey to Hollywood stardom. Tony Montana and Mark Bryan Smith were part of Duffy's inner circle when Miramax bought the Boondock Saints screenplay in 1997, and Duffy thought having his friends capture the whole experience would create an inspiring behind-the-scenes story about a bartender making it big in Hollywood. What he got instead was one of the most devastating documentaries ever made about a filmmaker's self-destruction. The resulting film, called Overnight, was released in 2003 and showed the world exactly what kind of person Troy Duffy really was. Montana and Smith captured everything on camera, including Duffy's increasingly abusive behavior toward his friends, family, and business partners as his deal with Harvey Weinstein fell apart. The documentary showed him bad-mouthing actors he'd never met, antagonizing the most powerful man in Hollywood, and treating the very people filming him with open contempt. According to co-director Montana, Duffy seemed to love the attention from their cameras and only asked not to be filmed 3 times during the entire production, and those were the occasions when he threatened them. The most damning aspect of Overnight is that most of the incriminating evidence came straight from Duffy's own mouth, captured on film with his full knowledge and permission. Montana and Smith later claimed they actually left out footage that would have made Duffy look even worse. The documentary premiered at film festivals and earned positive reviews, with critics calling it a cautionary tale about the costs of hubris in the indie film world. Roger Ebert gave it 3 out of 4 stars and noted that Duffy's family seemed to have been listening to his arrogance for a lifetime. While the Boondock Saints eventually found cult success on home video, Overnight effectively ended Duffy's filmmaking career for years, serving as a permanent record of how ego and poor people skills can destroy even the most promising Hollywood opportunities. Fact 11. Russian dialogue is complete gibberish. In the opening bar fight scene where Connor and Murphy McManus face off against the Russian mobsters, the brothers confidently speak what appears to be Russian to intimidate their opponents. The film even provides English subtitles translating their supposedly fluent Russian phrases. However, there's just one problem with this entire exchange. The words coming out of their mouths are complete and utter nonsense that bear absolutely no resemblance to actual Russian language. According to viewers who actually speak Russian, the sounds that Sean Patrick Flanery and Norman Reedus are making during this scene are mostly gibberish, with perhaps a few random Russian-sounding syllables thrown in for effect. The subtitles claim the brothers are saying specific threatening phrases to the mobsters, but the actual audio doesn't match up at all. It's not even close to real Russian. The actors appear to be simply making up vaguely Slavic-sounding noises and hoping nobody would notice or care. This becomes particularly amusing when you consider that the film makes a point of establishing the McManus brothers as gifted linguists throughout the story. FBI agent Paul Smecker even marvels at their ability to effortlessly switch between multiple languages, including French, Gaelic, German, and supposedly Russian. The brothers' linguistic talents are presented as one of their defining characteristics and something that impresses everyone around them. Yet here they are in this crucial early scene, basically just saying random sounds while the subtitles do all the heavy lifting to convince the audience they're actually speaking Russian. The production apparently didn't bother hiring a proper Russian language coach or having anyone who actually spoke the language check the dialogue for accuracy. They simply had the actors improvise foreign-sounding words, added convincing subtitles, and assumed most viewers wouldn't know the difference. For the vast majority of the audience who don't speak Russian, the trick worked perfectly fine. But for native speakers watching the film, this scene became unintentionally hilarious rather than intimidating. Fact 12. Duffy had never written anything before. Troy Duffy had absolutely zero screenwriting experience and had never written a screenplay before completing the Boondock Saints script in the fall of 1996, making his overnight success story even more remarkable and improbable. Before penning what would become one of the most talked about scripts in Hollywood, Duffy was working as a bartender and bouncer at a Los Angeles bar called J. Sloan's, spending his days serving drinks and his nights breaking up fights. He had no formal training in screenwriting, had never taken a film class, and hadn't even attempted to write a screenplay before sitting down to create the Boondock Saints. The inspiration for the film came from his real-life experiences living in a rundown apartment building where he constantly witnessed drug dealers and criminals operating with impunity. One particularly disturbing incident involved seeing a dead woman being wheeled out of a drug dealer's apartment across the hall from his own place, and the rage and helplessness he felt in that moment became the emotional foundation for his script. Duffy wrote the entire screenplay during his breaks and downtime from working at the bar, in channeling his frustration with street crime and his fantasies about vigilante justice into what would become his debut film. He completed the script without any connections to the film industry, without an agent, and without any real understanding of how Hollywood worked. His only advantage was a buddy who worked on a film set and helped him get the script into the hands of a producer's assistant at New Line Cinema. From there, the script began its unlikely journey through multiple studios, eventually landing in the hands of Harvey Weinstein at Miramax. The fact that a complete novice with no credentials, no portfolio, and no track record managed to spark a bidding war among major studios and secure a $300,000 deal remains one of the most unusual success stories in independent film history, even if Duffy's subsequent behavior would squander most of that opportunity. Fact 13. The family prayer uses incorrect Latin. One of the most iconic moments in the Boondock Saints is when the McManus brothers recite their family prayer before executing criminals, ending with the Latin phrase in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, which translates to, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's a powerful moment that reinforces the film's themes of religious vigilantism and family tradition. But there's just one problem. The Latin they actually say in the movie is completely wrong. Throughout the film, when Connor, Murphy, and eventually their father Il Duce recite the prayer together, they say, "In nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti," instead of the correct Latin form. The grammatically correct version should be, "In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti," with different word endings that reflect proper Latin grammar case usage. The errors are in the ablative case, which is what Latin requires after the preposition in when it means in the name of. Instead of nomine, they say nomine. Instead of patris, they say patri. And instead of filii, they say filii. Every single word in the phrase has the wrong ending. This mistake is particularly noticeable because the prayer is such a central element of the film and gets repeated multiple times throughout the story, including during the climactic courtroom scene where all three McManus men recite it together before executing the mob boss. For anyone with knowledge of Latin or familiarity with Catholic liturgy, the incorrect grammar stands out immediately, especially since the correct version of this phrase is one of the most well-known Latin expressions in Christianity and is used in churches around the world. What makes this error even more ironic is that the film places such heavy emphasis on Catholic imagery and ritual throughout its runtime, with the brothers attending Mass, kissing religious statues, and constantly invoking God as justification for their actions. The movie clearly wants to present the McManus family as deeply rooted in Catholic tradition, yet their signature family prayer, the moment that's supposed to represent their sacred bond and divine purpose, contains Latin that any Catholic priest or theology student would recognize as grammatically incorrect the moment they heard it. Fact 14, Blockbuster saved it from obscurity after the Boondock Saints bombed spectacularly in its limited theatrical release, earning just over $30,000 from 5 theaters in January 2000. The film seemed destined to disappear completely from public consciousness. Most movies that fail this badly at the box office simply fade away, never to be seen or remembered by anyone outside the small circle of people who worked on them. But the Boondock Saints had an unlikely savior waiting in the wings, and that savior was the now-defunct video rental giant Blockbuster Video. Blockbuster stepped in and struck a distribution deal with Indican Pictures to release the Boondock Saints as what they called a Blockbuster exclusive, which was a program the rental chain used for smaller independent films that either didn't get theatrical releases or had performed poorly in theaters. This arrangement meant that for a period of time, Blockbuster was essentially the only place where people could rent the movie, giving it prominent shelf space and marketing support that the film never received during its disastrous theatrical run. Troy Duffy later credited this deal as the thing that saved his movie, saying, "Indican Pictures and Blockbuster saved us." They agreed to take it on exclusively, and from there, the rest is history. What happened next was remarkable, and people began renting the film based on the cover art and word-of-mouth recommendations from friends, and those renters became passionate fans who told their own friends to check it out. The phenomenon spread organically, with the film building a devoted cult, following one rental at a time. The buzz continued to grow throughout the early 2000s, and the film eventually grossed over $50 million in domestic video sales alone, an astronomical return considering its $6 million budget and catastrophic theatrical performance. This video success was so significant that it led to a 2006 theatrical re-release and eventually greenlit the 2009 sequel, proving that sometimes a movie just needs to find its audience through unconventional means. Fact 15. The word fuck appears 246 times. If you've ever watched the Boondock Saints and thought the characters seemed to have a particular fondness for profanity, you weren't imagining things. The film uses the word fuck and its various derivatives exactly 246 times throughout its 108-minute runtime. That works out to an average of more than 2 F-bombs per minute, making it one of the most profanity-laden films of the late 1990s and establishing a tone that would become part of the movie's identity among its cult following. This staggering count wasn't accidental, but rather a deliberate choice by writer and director Troy Duffy, who wanted to capture the raw, unfiltered language of working-class Boston neighborhoods where the film is set. The excessive profanity became one of the movie's most memorable characteristics, with entire scenes built around creative uses of the word, including one particularly famous exchange where the character Rocco constructs multiple sentences using almost nothing but variations of fuck to express his frustration. The brothers Connor and Murphy respond by remarking that it certainly illustrates the diversity of the word, a line that became one of the film's most quoted moments among fans. The heavy profanity contributed significantly to the film's R rating and became part of what made the Boondock Saints feel authentic to its supporters, who appreciated the gritty, uncensored dialogue. Critics, however, often pointed to the excessive cursing as evidence of lazy screenwriting, arguing that Duffy relied too heavily on shock value rather than developing more nuanced dialogue. The film's TV broadcasts and edited versions had to work overtime to bleep out or dub over the constant stream of profanity, sometimes resulting in scenes that were nearly incomprehensible or unintentionally comedic when characters appeared to be speaking in nothing but awkward pauses and substitute words. This linguistic choice perfectly captured the film's overall aesthetic, unapologetically crude, deliberately provocative, and designed to push boundaries in ways that would either deeply resonate with audiences or completely turn them off, with very little middle ground between the two reactions.